All right, let's talk about a powerful framework for leaders. For those of you who want to kill bad ideas faster and get your teams learning into overdrive, we're going to be talking about something called the minimum viable test.
So let me just start by asking you a question, and be honest. How many experiments did your team actually run last week? 1? Maybe? 0? Look, if that number makes you a little uncomfortable, don't worry. You're in exactly the right place. We're going to unpack why that happens, and more importantly, how you can fix it. So here's the deal. The reason most teams aren't testing nearly enough is because they're caught in something I like to call the high-stakes testing trap. It's this vicious cycle that just grinds real learning to a halt. And it all starts with this one core belief, and it's buried deep in the culture of so many companies. That testing, well, that it's this massive, slow, and expensive undertaking. That it takes a ton of time, a huge budget, and a lot of people. And if you believe that, well, what happens next is perfectly logical, right? If tests are expensive, you can't afford to waste them on just any old idea. So teams only bring forward their most polished, their most pre-approved, their best ideas. The whole goal shifts from learning to just validating what you already think is right. And this is where the pressure cooker gets turned on. When you only run a few tests, each one suddenly feels like this massive, high-stakes bet on the future of the company. It feels like careers and promotions are on the line with every single outcome. So how do you de-risk these huge bets? What do your teams do? They overinvest. They go off and they build these beautiful, pixel-perfect, high-fidelity prototypes to make absolutely sure the test is fair, to give the idea its best possible shot. And boom, we are right back where we started. Building those beautiful, polished prototypes is exactly what makes testing slow and expensive in the first place. You're trapped. Your organization is stuck in the cycle of making these infrequent, high-pressure bets instead of what you really need, which is continuous, rapid learning. So, how in the world do we break out of this cycle? Well, we have to fundamentally reframe the goal of testing itself. And that brings us to the solution, the minimum viable test, or MVT for short. Now, an MVT has a very specific definition. We're not talking about testing a whole product here, not even a full feature. The goal is to isolate your single, riskiest assumption, and then you ask a simple question. What is the absolute fastest, cheapest thing we can do to simulate an experience and get real, behavioral evidence? We don't want opinions. We want to see what people actually do. And this helps clear up a really common point of confusion, the difference between an MVP and an MVT. Look, a minimum viable product is all about shipping value to a customer. An MVT has only one goal, to learn. We're shifting our entire focus from what's the smallest thing we can build to what's the smallest, fastest thing we can do to learn about our core assumptions. And the MVT framework itself is just beautifully simple. It's really just a two-step loop. First, you simulate an experience for a user. And second, you evaluate their behavior. That's it. Simulate, then evaluate. So let's break that down. Step 1, simulate the experience. This is not about building the real thing. It's about asking, what's the absolute simplest artifact we can possibly create to give the user the feeling of this idea? The key here is to always use the lowest possible fidelity. Think of this as the Fidelity Ladder. It's a mental model for how to choose your test. You always start at the very bottom, level 1. Can you learn what you need from just a simple, one-question survey? If not, okay, how about a sketch on a piece of paper? The rule is simple. You are not allowed to climb to a more expensive, higher fidelity rung on this ladder until you've proven you can't learn what you need from the cheaper ones below it. All right, now for step 2, which is every bit as critical. Before you run a single test, you have to define upfront what success looks like. This is totally non-negotiable. Why? Because it removes all the confirmation bias and storytelling after you get the results. And here is a simple but really powerful formula to do just that. You fill in the blanks as a team before you start. For example, we believe our assumption is supported if at least 3 out of 10 people click the Buy Now button. See? It forces total clarity and it makes the decision after the test dead simple. Okay, so that's all the theory, but what does this actually look like in the real world? Let me tell you about a startup that had this great idea for a curated city guide app. But before building a single thing, they had to answer one huge, risky question. Will people actually pay for this? Now just look at this contrast. The traditional path would have been a 6-month, $100,000 plus app build. Instead, they took the MVT approach. They created a simple PDF guide and a basic one-page website. Total time to do this? 2 days. Total cost? Under $1,000. So they ran some cheap online ads for 1 week. And the result? 2 sales. That's it. Just 2. Now, by any traditional metric, this would be seen as a spectacular failure. But this is the crucial reframe. That failure was actually a massive success. In 1 week, for less than the cost of a team lunch, they learned that their core assumption was wrong. They didn't waste 6 months and $100,000 building the wrong thing. They bought invaluable knowledge, cheaply and quickly. That right there is the power of the MVT. So as a leader, you're probably thinking, okay, I get it, I'm sold. But how do I actually make this a reality in my organization? Well, it requires you to make a really conscious shift in what you ask for and, more importantly, what you reward. Here's your playbook. It's simple. Stop asking for polished roadmaps and start asking, what's the simplest test we can run this week? Start rewarding the team that runs a clever, cheap test, not the one that has the most beautiful mock-up. Give your teams a small budget and the autonomy to go run their own tests without asking for permission. And this is the big one. When a test proves an idea is bad, celebrate it. Celebrate it publicly. That team just saved the company a fortune. So let's bring all this home with one concrete action you can take to put this into practice immediately. Here it is. In your very next product meeting, I want you to identify the single biggest, scariest assumption on the table. Then turn to the team and ask this exact question. How can we get the first piece of real user data on this in the next 48 hours? That question, right there, forces the entire conversation to shift away from big, long builds and toward rapid MVT-style learning. And that's what I'll leave you with. As you look at your own product roadmap at your biggest strategic bets for the next quarter, what is the one risky assumption that you can and that you will design a minimum viable test for this week?